Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS-collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 274. Today, I'm joined by my buddy Chad Sylvester for part 2 of our listener Q&A, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope some of you out there had a chance to take full advantage of the nice weather that we had. At least, I guess, on Friday, I guess it was nice, and then Saturday was kind of rainy. So maybe it wasn't so nice. Friday was nice. We'll leave it at that. But you're probably stuck at work. Had a chance to get out on Sunday, do just a little bit of scouting. Like I mentioned, Saturday the weather wasn't great. And truth be told, I spent Saturday watching the NCAA wrestling tournament, so I wasn't too awfully broke up about not being able to get out and do the work that I wanted to do necessarily. But did get out on Sunday, checked out a little area that I wanted to check out that was left over. At this point, most of my scouting is done for local. Now the only thing I really need to do is make the jump into the Big Woods piece that I need to continue to break down. It's either been snow or rain or prior family obligations that have kept me from getting up there. Mainly snow. I was really hoping to get up there earlier in March, to be honest, and it just wasn't going to happen. Every time the snow would start to melt off, we would get another round of snow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of the same story as last year, and I'm figuring out that's probably just going to be how it rolls up there based on its location and stuff like that. So the last weekend here, I don't even know what the date is for that. I'm actually going to look at the calendar because I'm trying to figure out what my plans are. It looks like the weekend of the 25th of March. Hopefully, I'll be able to get up there. At least that's the plan for right now. And then have a bit of a turkey hunt that's planned up there potentially too. And so I'm hoping to make maybe 2 trips between now and the opening of turkey season, make turkey season the 3rd trip. And then I think I'll feel pretty good at that point about, having some postseason stuff done. And then, of course, some odds and ends stuff over the course of the summer, camera checking and some more additional poking around maybe at some new areas and stuff like that at that point. But continue to try to make a plan. Going to have applications here soon coming up for hunts for this year. I'm already going to Idaho, so that's kind of in the books and ready. And then still on the fence as to whether or not I'm going to try to go back to Kansas or not. I really would like to redeem myself on that hunt, and it's just a really cool place to hunt. But this spot in PA has kind of been calling my name, and some of the inventory that I got last year, there's one spot in particular that I just feel like is going to be dynamite year over year, just based on the inventory and intel that I got from this year alone. And I kind of want to see if I can capitalize on that. And so I'm kind of torn. Ain't gonna lie. lot cheaper on gas to drive to this spot than it is to drive to Kansas. But, we won't let that necessarily deter us. But before we jump into today's show, have a message to pass along to all you guys, as I was just kind of talking about cameras and stuff like that. My buddies over at Exodus have a really cool opportunity. If you haven't heard me talk about it before, I will give you the deets now. What they are doing is a first time ever deal where they're offering a trade-in program for the remainder of March. So the rest of this month, you can get involved. If you currently have an Exodus camera that is registered in their database, you can trade in any old Lift 2 or Trek and lock in a $100 savings off the Exodus Render or the Render bundle. If you like the idea of trading up, here's what you'll need to do. Go to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and use the code TRADEUP, that's all one word, TRADEUP, at checkout to lock in your $100 savings. After the order, the Exodus team will email you a shipping label with the order number for reference to your email. You print that return label, put it on the box, put the camera in the box, and then send it back to Exodus. After Exodus gets the camera, they'll ship you your order. That was kind of a lot to follow or to digest at the moment. So go to the link in the podcast notes I have in the on the blog or on the Waypoint page, and follow the instructions in that link that they have on their website. As you guys know, I've been using their cameras for a long time. They kick ass. If you have an opportunity or need to upgrade your current camera situation, I would definitely take full advantage of this. With that, have a cool show for you guys today. This is part number 2 of the listener Q&A session that Chad and I did. I want to say it was probably like 3 weeks ago now, roughly, that we did it. And we kind of run the gamut all over the place in terms of questions. This one we actually do address the who killed Epstein. The upfront of the last one, I actually got a little rambunctious and mentioned that we were going to do that in the last one, but the way the edit came out, that did not happen in the last episode. So we talk about a whole host of things on this podcast. Always fun time talking through the questions that you guys send in. Always kind of makes us think a little bit more deeply about things than maybe we typically do, and then also brings up things that we sometimes don't think about. So hope you guys dig the show, and as always, want to thank you all for listening. All right, this next one is Vandernal DJ. Sorry, man, butchered your name. How do I see more bucks outside the rut? Man, that's like the $8 million question, right?
DJ, when you figure that out, man, you'll be a millionaire, because you could sell that theory and this concept and those tactics to anybody. 3 million whitetail hunters.
You could probably start yourself a workshop if you'd like to, on that one. I mean, look, I think the earlier outside of the rut, I'm not going to say anything here that's groundbreaking that people haven't talked about before. You've got to be in close to bedding is really what it comes down to. And, there's a lot of, guys who are successful at hunting buck beds and, and doing things, and getting close to beds. And Greg's one of those guys. He will hunt a specific bed. You don't have to hunt a specific bed necessarily. You just need to be in the bedding area, like in the general area that deer wants the bed, and he probably has multiple beds in there that he's going to use on different winds and things like that. Some of the stuff we talked about earlier, which is playing that food game, like what are the changing food sources, in the area? Is there a primary ag field that just got cut and now he's going to transition to stuff that's in the timber or whatever the case is? I mean, for me, the way I started seeing bucks outside the rut is what I talked about at the beginning, and it's become my favorite time of year to hunt. I like hunting the October lull when no one else wants to be out, and I've qualified a few different areas. I hunt specific dates related to specific spots that I've found consistent activity within those date ranges in and around primary scrapes and bedding. Like, that's what I focus on. That's the way I've been able to, the past 2 years at least, have mature buck encounters in the early part of October. I'm not a great bed hunter. It's something I always try to work on. I'm just not great at it. So I rely on, long-term data and finding spots that I can hunt based off of date and activity. And that's really my strategy. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat, but that's just the way that I've found, at least for me, that I can have the type of encounters that I want to have during that time of year.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be in close to where they're laying their head during the day. And that's, that's what it boils down to. The problem with that is if you're not hunting public, or if you're on a limited, I should say it's not a public versus private thing, but it's a size thing. If you're on a piece with a limited size and they're not bedded on you, like, you are in a very difficult spot.
Yeah.
And I think
you're screwed, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only way to overcome that is to do what you said and use historical data from previous years around those daylight activities, and kind of keep your fingers crossed that all the variables, the weather, the habitat, the pressure, all that stuff, food source, remain consistent for that daytime activity to occur in the present season.
Yeah.
I think those are the only two ways you're going to find success.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just like when I say finding those food sources and stuff like that, like, ideally you want them in and close to where they're bedded, because the reality is if you're not close to Chad's point where they're laying their head down, and you're not within 100 to 150 yards of that, chances of you seeing them in daylight are pretty slim. Unless they make a mistake, or it just happens to be a day that like a front comes through or something like that, and they just happen to move a little bit early. If you're a moon person, maybe you play the moon. I'm not. So I don't really pay much attention to that. The only other way is like finding like that transition area that they want to be in before they actually make their big move, like for the evening. And that usually is also a place of a kind of, I won't say a destination food source, but it's their transitional kind of feeding area. Also usually very close to bed, but it might be a spot where you can get them to pull out a little further from bed a little earlier. So, looking for those kind of like transitional places that they're going to want to spend time before they make their big move. But other than that, I mean, you got to be in tight. Anything else to add to that, or we got that one?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. We already covered doe hunting. Oh, here's our buddy, old Kevin Vistison chiming in here. Did Epstein kill himself? He asks.
Oh.
This is going to be another arrow answer, a little rabbit hole.
It is, dude, because I just read The Perversion of Justice, which was written about Epstein, and then I've also listened to the Daryl, I forget the guy's last name, Jocko Willink and Daryl, damn, I can't think of the guy's last name, but they have a specific podcast, I think it's called The Unraveling, where they go in and do a bunch of research and have like these long debates and present this information. And like Epstein was funneling money for the freaking CIA for, freaking 20 some years, like into the Iran contraband, like just wild and crazy things. Yeah. So no, he did not kill himself.
Yeah. No, we'll keep it short. He did not. I mean, just any person with common sense would go like, aside from like the other stuff, and like, he was connected to like Old Man Bush, who was the director of the CIA, and like all that stuff, right? Like that's, you can go down the wormhole of that stuff. But if you just look at it in real terms, none of the security guards saw anything. You have a high profile.
They were sleeping.
Yeah, they were sleeping. High profile prisoner who probably should have like 24-hour security detail at that point. You would think, right?
Yeah.
Might be a guy you want to keep alive because he's got a lot of dirt on a lot of people. And just so happens that while the guards were sleeping, all the cameras happened to go out.
Yeah.
Like
3 of them.
Like there was just a lot of really convenient things that had to happen for him to do that. So the short answer is I don't think so. If you think so, I've got a great piece of beachfront property I would love to sell you in Arizona. So anyway, all right, on to the next. How to hunt clear cuts that have reached pole-sized trees 4 to 6 inches in diameter and 10 plus years old. I think we both have a lot of, and then similarly, Justin Enck asked these 2 questions. So that's kind of part 1. Part 2 is hunting inside clear cuts. Can it be done? So you want to take a swing at this one first, or you want me to?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at it. I think on those older clear cuts, typically what we see that they really start to lose their value as a whole once, and again, I guess some of this depends on the growing season. If you're further north, I think the time the time period changes with less daylight, shorter growing periods, but kind of in that southern Ohio, southern Indiana, northern Kentucky, maybe southern Pennsylvania, those types of areas. After 5 years, we really see the activity in the cuts kind of retract, and I think that it's from that regeneration. Number one, it becomes so thick that a lot of times deer in box can't just navigate through it without having a hell of a hard time. Yeah. Number one, and then number two, I think that as that stuff starts to age, a lot of that browse is naturally growing, and the browse level just becomes too high for them to use. I think there's other easier, more attractive food sources there. So after that 5 year mark, we see the attractiveness drop on those cuts, but deer are still using the edge. Like going back to one of the previous answers about like what are you looking for as a starting point when you're e-scouting? Those older cuts have tremendous edges. We'll see deer bed on those edges. We'll see scrapes on those edges. We'll see just not random, but general deer sign along those edges. So they still will use it, but in a different manner when you're looking at cuts with high stem count, fast hardwood regeneration. Hunting in cuts, man, there's so much that plays into that. I think if you have the topography and clean access and exits, I think that you can do it. I have not ever had very much success. I've had encounters inside of clear cuts, but to get in clean, visually and audibly without being recognized, man, I've had a hell of a time doing that. It's very, very difficult in the stuff that we're in. And quite frankly, like I've not had any success.
Yeah. Now I would echo, everything that you just said, especially about hunting inside the clear cuts. Can it be done? Sure. There's some setups that I've kind of scouted out that potentially would be good inside of clear cuts. And I have a little strategy on how to find these, but they are just incredibly hard to access and get into. Like it's nearly impossible, especially when you're talking about like October. Like even now with like the leaves and stuff off and it's as bare as it's going to be, it's still hard. And so just magnify that with, all the stuff on the tree. So is it possible? Sure. I mean, if I knew that there was a big deer that was in there using it and it was like the one place I could kill him, then I would figure out a way. But again, if he's bedded in there, it's like, and that, then how is he getting there and what's his exit trail? You know what I mean? Like, right. So you hunt him on his way out, or hunt him on his way in the morning, whatever the case is. You don't have to necessarily be in there. I would say that there's value to scouting the insides of the clear cuts, if you can get in, because it'll tell you, it's told me a lot about a specific spot because I've used like these little water ingress areas that kind of wash out some of the foliage. It makes it easier for me to get into, and then I can get in. And then typically it'll flood in the spot and it'll kill everything, like where it just becomes like swamp grass and stuff like that, kind of in the center of it or in a low-lying spot. And in there, I can really kind of see definitively like how they're using that cut, how they're getting in and out of it, because all the trails kind of like coalesce there, and then you can kind of see like the spider web from there where they're going.
Right.
And then when you see that, at least me, it's like I sit there and I look at it and I think about, all right, well, what wind would they use these on, and where would they be coming from, or where would they be going? And I can figure out like, is this a coming or going trail? And then what wind would that trail be, for? And so you can start to use that for like puzzle piece building and stuff like that. And that's mainly what I would use the inside of the cut for, would be to check that out. As far as like, that age of cut, I do have some cuts around where I live that are in that age range. And I still find some value in them only because there's not a lot of other adequate kind of cover and or habitat that's near it, I guess is one way to say it. So it's still, even though it's not great, it's the best that's available. And so they're still kind of using it to a degree. But one thing that I've kind of learned and figured out on some of these cuts that are near me, that maybe are of an older age cut that isn't as good as it could be, is that, when someone's doing habitat work on their farm or whatever, and they're knocking stuff down, let's say, for example, right, they're doing some select cutting or whatever. And maybe it's along a field edge, because if you think about a clear cut in terms of like kind of an edge, like Chad said, it's a natural edge, and a field edge is a natural edge. A lot of times what people will do when they're doing habitat work is they'll do edge feathering around that to make like a brushy kind of buffer between the actual field edge, the edge feathering that is the buffer, and then the hard edge that's created by whatever cut they did or whatever habitat improvement they've done. What I've started doing is looking for those clear cuts that might be too old, and do they have that natural edge feathering around it to where they've got like this adjacent kind of brush. It's not clear cut, but it's just like the brush that kind of like came along with the equipment that had to be in there to do the cutting, that kind of, let's just say damaged or, turned over the soil in those areas to kind of create regenerative growth that isn't cut related. So that's the one thing that I will look for, that I've kind of had to learn to look for around me, because the cuts are a little bit older. So, what do you think of that? Is that something you see in some of the places that some of the cuts you're hunting too?
Sometimes I think in the areas that we're hunting cuts, there's a pretty good timber management program in place where they're continuously cutting different areas of the forest. So there's there's logging activity just about year round.
Yeah.
So there's like, if you were to draw, get on Onyx or look at a map and take a clear cut that was cut 3 years ago and draw a 2 mile radius around that. There's going to be other cuts that are newer in that 2 mile radius. So there's I guess there's a little bit of pooling and drawing power, because they're, again, going back to the big woods, there's not a whole lot of structure. There's not ag, so the food sources are limited. So you can look at those cuts, those newer cuts, again, in that area, 1 to 5 years old, almost as a giant freaking food plot or an ag field, especially through summer, at least until that vegetation starts to dry out, acorns start to drop, and then, things kind of shift a little bit. But we do see some of that. And, again, if that clear cut is pole size timber, one of the things that I haven't seen this, but Steve Shirk up in Northwest Pennsylvania has talked about those cuts that are 15 to 20 years old, after that pole size timber starts to shade out the understory, where that starts to become, again, with no sunlight, that understory, that high stem count stuff starts to die off, and becomes a little more open. He actually sees that type of cut, or that age of cut, being used again more for bedding, bedding opportunities, specifically around those edges, because naturally, like to your point about the field edges, like when you think about where the sun penetrates the ground or hits the ground the most, is typically around an edge. Like if you were to walk around an ag field or maybe a fallow field or whatever that meets hard timber, usually that first 10 yards or so has a high stem count, and that's from the just the sun naturally hitting the forest floor in those areas. And he's seeing that type of habitat diversity in those older cuts related to bedding. I personally haven't seen that a ton, because again, I'm focusing on that younger stuff, but that is something that other people are saying is valid, and they're seeing deer use it. So there must be something to it.
Right. Yeah. And it could just be the difference in where you're at versus where he's at. Like being further south, like the growing season's a little bit different. And so it might be just a little bit more, just in general, more regeneration in general, like overall. All right. So those are the hunting related ones, man. We've got some camera related questions, and I've got the camera guy on the line. So I think we're going to talk some cameras and camera strategy. If you can dig it, can you dig it?
Let's do it, man. Don't get your hopes up though.
Don't threaten you with a good time. We're going to talk some good. All right. This fella writes in, and I can't see his name because I cut it off. Should I keep trail cameras out all year? If not, what are the best months to have them? So you are the trail camera guru, so you can swing at this one first.
Yeah, I mean, you're not doing yourself any disfavors by leaving them out all year, but from maybe a cost perspective, I think that there is a window between now and May where you're probably not getting a ton of relevant information if you've ran trail cameras there in the past. So the way we look at this is, if it's a new area that we know nothing about, we're going to leave those cameras out 365. We want to know, from, I guess, dating from January 1 through December 31st. We want to know what those deer are doing in the late season, when they're dropping sheds, how they're recovering, and then how fast that they're starting to grow. And then also those fawn dropping dates, like when it comes to later part of May, beginning of June, we want to know when those fawns are dropped, because that the gestation period of a whitetail is roughly 201 days, or just say 200 days. So if you catch a new fawn that's a couple of days old, then you can backdate that to know when that doe's bred, and kind of give yourself a better understanding of what is going on there as far as doe breeding, peak rut, breeding activity based on those fawn dates. So that's something in May, later part of May, beginning of June, that you can gather from trail cameras that most people are just so focused and concentrated on getting pictures of bucks. I think that a lot of times that's overlooked. Outside of getting that initial data set, or the data points for that first 12-month cycle, for the most part, if you're familiar with that piece, I think that you could go from June, put your cameras out in June. You have a card check in the later part of July, and then you have a card check after the 20th of August to kind of get your summer inventory, and then you can roll into your in-season strategy. And I say that August 20th date very specifically, because one of the things that we've seen, and I'd never put this together until I heard Mark Jury speak on this. Mark had this theory or concept where bucks that did not summer on him would make kind of a late summer excursion to check out their fall range around that August 16th, 17th, 18th time frame. So he made sure that any of the cameras he pulled later part of summer, he would never do that before August 20th. And I never put that together until I was hunting that big specific deer. He would show up. He would show up on those dates every single year over year, and he'd be there for 2 days, gone, and then he shows back up in October. And then when I heard Mark talk about it, that like instantly clicked with me. So that's one thing I would say. If like you're not running trail cameras in summer, you're probably missing some data points from those bucks telling you that, hey, I'm still alive. I'm not summering here, but I plan to be back here in the fall, back in my fall range.
Yeah. Well, and it's no surprise. Like I have a lot of the same trail camera strategies that you do, as far as how I use them. Now, for me, I try to run them, as many of them as I can all year round. Like there's a handful of them that I've had out all year that are still out now. What I do is, during rifle season, I do go pull a bunch of them because I just don't want them to get stolen. And then I try to get back out, shortly after, rifle season's over in Pennsylvania, and get trail cameras back out, because I want to see who potentially made it through gun season and who might be around for next year. And those I'll only put out in kind of like key spots. It won't be like, like a normal kind of deployment. It'll just be in kind of key locations. Whether it's a primary scrape or, a bedding area or whatever the case is that I want to keep tabs on, and maybe keep tabs on a particular deer. And then from there, actually, when I put my trail cameras out, I actually put them out starting kind of now. So I'll pull most of them, right around Thanksgiving. And then they'll all start to go back out right around end of February, beginning of March. Just because, and when I say that, it won't be necessarily all of them. A lot of times what it is that when I'm scouting either a new piece or a new area, and I think that I've come across the community scrape, I want to qualify it. So a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm hanging a trail camera on that in, late February, early March, and then I'm going back to pull it, when I get ready to set the rest of my cameras out sometime like around end of April, beginning of May, to start watching for velvet and stuff like that. Because what I want to see is when I pull that camera that I set out in March or February, if deer are hitting that licking branch or what I thought was a community scrape in February, March, in May, while I was getting ready to set out cameras, or April, now I have a pretty good feeling now that that's a community scrape if they're hitting it in the off season. And so now I just kind of mark that as like, all right, I've got another spot that I know is going to be one of those places where I'm going to get great inventory, and it's probably going to be huntable just based on the activity and in the time that people are, or that deer are hitting that scrape. Now I've had community scrapes that have kind of turned off for periods of time too. That'll be a learning process through that first year to understand how it's being used and how consistently throughout the year. But I use this time in the off season to really kind of use my cameras to kind of qualify community scrapes that I think that I've found. And then other than that, I kind of use them exactly how Chad has mentioned.
Yeah. One additional, I guess, talking point, if people have theft kind of top of mind, and I think I know this relates more to private ground than it does public, but, with our theft policy, this is something we track is, how many cameras get stolen every year because, we replace those at cost or whatnot. And we see more cameras being stolen during now, so the spring period, late February, March, April is when we see the majority of cameras being stolen on private ground. And I think that, to me, that relates to trespassing, due to the increase of shed hunting, maybe mushroom hunters or people trying to dig up ginseng. They get their picture taken. They know they're not supposed to be there. Boom, they take your camera. So if this is just like a general talking point, if theft is top of mind and you have private ground, I would say take your cameras down right now, unless you want to risk the chance of that camera being stolen, in hopes that you get a identifiable photo or video to kind of handle that in a legal manner.
Right.
It's kind of up to you, but that's definitely some data that we see hold true year over year over year on the theft side.
Right. Yeah. I actually went to locking I shouldn't say most of them, locking a lot of them up because of that. Just not private ground trespassing, but just I had more trail cameras stolen this year than I had probably the past 5 years combined. And so I was like, all right. And it's not so much the camera necessarily, as shitty as that is to say. It's more so the card.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm like, I got all this data and all this intel that I really want. I'm like, I can get another camera. I can't get that information that I'll never see.
Exactly.
So this next question is where to set cameras up for scouting missions in March for upcoming out-of-state trips. You want to take the swing at this one first? Or you want me to?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. I want to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, so I think I just kind of covered, how I kind of use them in the off season. I think you have to ask yourself a couple questions, like, are you going to make it back out to move them or not? How well do you know the place that you're going, and what time of year do you plan to hunt it if you're not going to go back to be able to move cameras?
Mm-hmm.
I think that those are all kind of things you need to ask yourself first. And just for the sake of this question, I'm going to assume they're making a scouting trip in March. They're probably not going to get back until they're going to hunt it, would be my guess, right? And so I'm going to assume then at the same time that you're probably going for the rut, because that's typically when most people are going to take their vacations. It depends on how many cameras you have. I know that these are a lot of dependencies I'm throwing out there, but I think if you have very, very limited cameras, I would say you're going to, and again, we're assuming you're going to be there, during the rut. I would assume you're going to want to likely set those up as though they were fall cameras. At least that's what I would do. I would spend time scouting. I would try to find community scrapes, and I would try to set those cameras up on those community scrape areas. Related to those community scrapes, I would try to find the funnels that were or pinch points that are leading to and from those areas. I'd spend a lot of time e-scouting first and try to figure out, do I kind of get an idea where the best bedding opportunities are related to those specific spots. I would try to locate some doe bedding, and I would try to put some cameras, a camera or two in and around, where I think a doe family group is spending time. So I have at least a doe group that I know is in the area that I can try to play off of potentially. Also somewhat depends on how much time you're going to spend scouting. If it's like a 2-day trip, then you're really going to have to take some flyers. If you're going to spend like a week scouting somewhere or something like that, then you probably can be a little bit more strategic or precise with where you're going to place your cameras. And then if I have one, if there's a food source that's around somewhere, I'm probably going to try to set one there, because I just want to get an inventory of what's in the area, like what quality is in the area. But if I have limited cameras, I'm probably going to just really focus on those kind of elements that I'm going to be able to hunt off of during the course of my trip. I think that would probably be my approach. At least that's the way I've kind of approached it in general. Whenever I've hung cameras out of state, it's typically been that type of setup.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you mentioned. Assuming that they're taking a trip to postseason scout, and then the second trip would be during obviously during season. You're gonna want to hunt hot sign come October, come November. So I think from a trail camera standpoint, like the goal there is to gather inventory. Like you want inventory of what bucks are going to be there in the fall. The summertime stuff, it could help you. It's kind of a crapshoot. Some deer are going to relocate. We know when those bachelor groups break up, some deer might stick around. It's you don't really know that. That's one of the downsides of going into a new piece. It's kind of not necessarily fly by night, but a lot of it's MRI. So I think it boils down to inventory purposes, like you mentioned, fall food sources and scrapes, primary scrapes, and then understanding what deer are in the area and base your hunting off of most recent information, scouting your way in, reading hot sign, and how that relates to what you're getting on trail cameras.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a one-time trip, you're going to be the trail camera data is going to be helpful, but because it's not longitudinal or long-term data, it's not going to be super, super actionable. It's going to be a guidepost to say like, yeah, there's either deer here that I'm willing to hunt or not, or I need to kind of move on to a degree. Now, if you plan to make this trip multiple times, over the course of the next couple of years, then I think, now you're in business and you can start to build a little bit of a database to try to start to, figure some stuff out and play some of those date games, because what you might learn is that first week of November isn't when you should be there. It should be the third week of October. You start to learn those types of things, but you only get that by having that data. And so, if you're a guy that wants to take a trip every year, and you want to kind of learn a piece as like almost like a second home, if you will, then I would run cameras, in my fall spots year over year for a handful of years until I kind of get some really strong data points that I feel like I can have some, a fair shot at success. I'd probably go into it knowing that it's a likely like a 2-year plan, at minimum, to at least maybe get on consistent deer. What terrain features, this is Luke MCD 44, what terrain features should you focus on putting trail cams on, and what time of year? I think we kind of covered that in that last one, but if there's any nuance to this one that you feel we didn't cover.
No, well, one of the things that we haven't talked about are thermal hubs.
Yeah.
Like down in bottoms with, when you have when you're in hill country and you have a bunch of points kind of dumping down into a bottom, a lot of times you go down in those bottoms, you'll see a lot of nighttime activity, a lot of nighttime sign. You'll find, trails or runways coming down off those points, crossing that bottom. You'll find tracks, you find rubs, scrape lines, all of that. So I think from an inventory perspective and efficiency standpoint, that's an awesome place to throw a camera up and get some data on how those deer are using that. And it can also not just how they're using it, but in how they're using it in relation to bedding and on what point. A lot of times in hill country, those bucks, deer in general, are going to bed on those points. And just having a camera down in those crossings, if a deer's down there an hour after dark or an hour before sunup, like you have a very good idea of where that deer is bedded, or at least in that general direction. Yeah. So on top of the things that we've talked about in some of these previous answers, that would be one thing that I would strongly urge people to do is look at some of those thermal hubs and make sure you have cameras when the sign is apparent.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think the other thing too is that you mentioned there is, and it's not related necessarily to terrain and features, per se. We talked about benches earlier. Like I place cameras on benches, especially in this new spot that I'm kind of sussing out, last year and this upcoming year, because it was related to a cut and it was related to a place where I was kind of getting nocturnal images, and I wanted to see if I moved in this general direction on this different feature, if I would get daylight pictures. And and I did. The one thing that you mentioned about what time are they coming through when they're hitting these certain crossings or whatever, I think that that's important aside from the terrain and the feature. I think a lot of people look at these pictures of bucks and are like, oh, that's a cool picture. He's a big deer. And then that's all the further that it goes. But there's a ton of info that's in that aside from like the weather and whatever. If you look at what time that deer's coming through, like Chad said, and you can kind of look at a map and say, well, where's the next best bet? I mean, if that deer's coming through it, let's say sunup is, I don't know, let's say it's 7 o'clock. Let's say we're like late October or whatever, early November before the time change, whatever. It's like 7 o'clock or something like that. And that buck's coming through at 6:38 a.m., right? Pretty good chance you're not far off from where he's bedded.
Exactly.
Like you're probably 100 to 150 yards, 200 at the furthest from where he's probably laying down. You know what I mean? And 200, in my opinion, at that point would be a stretch. It's probably more like 100. And so, making sure you're paying attention to that timestamp, when that deer is coming through, when he's leaving, can tell you a lot about where he's spending his daylight hours. So I think we covered that one pretty well. What do you think? Good?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool. Setting cameras long-term, months or longer. Discuss your settings that you prefer, delays, etc. Well, that's a good question. That's one that I don't really ever get asked very often.
Yeah, I think, I think there's a lot of people that are starting to use long-term trail camera strategies and long-term sets, which in my opinion, that is the best way to use standard SD card cameras. It's in a long-term fashion. I think the data points are much more accurate. They're unaltered, and you get a much clearer picture of what is going on there through the entire hunting season. When it comes to settings, I always take the approach that I want as much data as possible. So I am going to run a shorter trigger delay. It depends on where it's set at. If it's on a community scrape, I'm going to run a longer trigger delay, and I'm probably going to use video mode. I say longer trigger delay as in like 45 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds, somewhere in that ballpark range. And some of that is in fear of that licking branch, or, a lot of times I'm running them on scrapes underneath beech trees where they're holding their foliage a lot longer. The wind starts blowing, and all of a sudden you get your SD card full of a false trigger. So you really got to be careful on kind of every scenario is a little bit different, and you really have to make a judgment call on some of this stuff. But generally speaking, personally, I'm going to use photo mode more than video mode, only because I know that camera is going to soak for a year. I mean, when I talk long term, it's from at the shortest from June till March. I mean, at the shortest. So knowing that there's potential there to have a freaking crap ton of pictures, and depending on your camera, you may have limited SD card capacity. So, 1 or 2 shot burst is what I'm looking at. I don't need to have 5 pictures of the same doe family group coming through there. I just have, I look at a trigger event as one data point, regardless of if it's 5 photos or 3 photos or 1 photo. Like, that's one trigger event. That's one data point.
Yep.
So, make sure you have the right batteries is a big thing. Make sure that your battery setup is on point, that you're going to get a whole season. I would not use alkaline batteries, use lithium batteries. But then going back to the settings, shorter trigger delay. If I'm running in photo mode, it's going to be a 1-shot burst, maybe a 2, no more than 2. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave all my PIR sensitivity and my flash range and everything set to high. Right. I'm not gonna monkey with that. I'm not gonna monkey with operating hours. I want the camera to run 24/7. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, I follow a lot of the same principles. A lot of my cameras are out for long term. I pretty much run any camera that is not in a pinch point, like a funnel, if you will. All of my cameras are on video mode. Now, granted, majority of them are set up on scrapes by and large. But, ones that I'd have that are set up in, pinch points, or just place where I'm just catching some natural travel or natural movement, those are typically on just, regular picture mode. My video length is usually anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds, just depending on the setup. And then my delay is usually somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds as well. Kind of similar to you. I don't want to get things filled up with a bunch of false triggers, so I set the trigger delay kind of longish, I guess. And I don't know, for me, I just felt like that 20 to 30-second kind of time frame of video feels like enough, because I don't feel like I'm missing deer that are coming into the frame late or anything like that. I feel like it's a good kind of time frame. I don't really mess with anything, beyond that, like the other settings necessarily. I leave them kind of all standard and as is. The only thing that I do, a little bit different, and this goes outside of settings, but it plays into it because, most like my cameras are on video mode, like I mentioned, especially over scrapes. Now, I do like to use cell cameras on scrapes because of those areas I typically don't want to intrude a lot, right? And I don't like to run my cell cameras on video mode, even though the renders, you can do video with those. I'm just sensitive to like having videos sent via app, data plan, blah 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 blah. What I actually do is I set two cameras up on those. I set a cell camera up that's just sending me real time data, right? Just that way I know kind of daily what's going on. And then I set a regular SD card camera, either above it or below it, and I set that on video mode to get all the kind of directional coming and going, because I want to see how that deer is coming in, how he's leaving. I want to see his body language. I want to see, does he posture up when other bucks kind of come to the scrape. I want to get all that kind of behavioral data, and that's how I kind of do that. The only thing I'm kind of tweaking for this year, and I picked this up from Troy Pottinger, is he hangs old man's beard. I'm going to have to find something else because there's none of that in kind of the area that I have these scrapes, but something that's actually a directional kind of wind checker at that spot when those deer are there. Not necessarily relying on like the prevailing, because the prevailing could be doing something completely different in that location than what the prevailing is suggesting. Between prevailing wind currents, and thermals, they all kind of act to give you your actually wind direction in a spot. He uses old man's beard. I'm gonna end up using like some type of thread or something like that that's really light. That way, when a deer comes into that scrape, I can see which direction that thread is blowing, so I'll know the actual wind direction. It helps me wind map those areas without actually having to be there to wind map.
Yeah, essentially. That's a very, 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 very good tip.
Yeah. So that's settings plus, I guess we'll call that answer. We're almost done here, man. I think we almost. This one wants to know if we ever had a woman in flip flops and shorts with no light walk by their cameras 4 miles deep in. Can't say that I have.
No.
Again, we're gonna go back to the beginning here. Talk to Taylor Chamberlain.
Yeah.
On that one. This one's a good one, man, because I do get asked this question, and I think we probably gloss over it and think that it's common knowledge, but I hear a lot of people complain about this just in general. But tips for keeping bugs out of their cameras during the summer months, because that's obviously like the worst time of year for it, and plenty of cameras get ruined during that time of year, which sucks because that's when you want to have them out for velvet. So I know what some tips are, but like, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are some things you can certainly do. We've talked on this point multiple times, I guess, over the last 7 years. But the thing that we like to do the best is just use permethrin. So the same stuff that you're buying to spray on your clothes to keep ticks and mosquitoes and horseflies and all that nasty stuff off of you while you're doing anything outdoors in the summertime. We're applying that stuff to our cameras. You can spray that on your straps and have that done like the day before you physically put them out. But we usually just carry a bottle with us while we're placing them in the field in June, and we'll spray basically around the camera. You got to be careful spraying the camera itself. I've never had any negative reaction with that stuff being on plastic, but you're not supposed to necessarily spray it on your skin. I don't know how it's going to react to plastic, so we tend to shy away from that. But just spraying that around the perimeter of the camera, the base of the tree, above the camera, below the camera, on the camera sides, just a couple squirts, has done wonders from keeping ants away, from keeping spiders away. Spiders will build nests or spin webs or whatever in front of your lens, and then all of a sudden you have thousands of pictures of a spider and everything's all blurry and blocked out. You can't see anything. So permethrin is definitely one thing you can do to keep bugs out. The other thing that we've done in the past. And this is probably a tip more for cell cameras or long-term strategies where you're not going back in to ever check these SD cards. But even like the powder and like the insect, like the granular, I'm not sure what the proper term is. It comes in like a shaker tube.
Yeah, I know what
there's
you're
like
talking
little
about.
granular pellets like you sprinkle out around your house, like in the mulch or around the sidewalk or whatever. You could take a fingerful of that stuff and actually put it inside your camera door. So like inside the housing, maybe where the batteries are, or like with our cameras, you could just stick it right inside in that front door and close the camera up. And that also will keep insects and bugs away from your camera. The problem is like when you open that camera up to check your SD card, all that stuff falls out, and then in July, if you're checking that camera 30 days or 4 weeks after you put it out, all of a sudden there's nothing there to protect it for the rest of the summer. Yeah. So to me, that's where permethrin works a little bit better. But if it's a cell camera you're putting it out and you don't have any intentions of or need to go back in and open that camera up or check it, you can use the powder or the granular form.
Yeah, I mean, my go-to is the permethrin. Like I just like you do, I just carry a bottle of it with me whenever I'm out putting out cameras and stuff like that. And I spray the straps and I spray the tree around it, and I'm good. Typically, if you're putting your cameras out in May or whatever the case is for velvet, I mean that's really the only time frame you have to worry about is that summer time frame. So if you're spraying it in May, like you should be good through like the prime bug season, and
Yep.
you should be able to get on the other side of it. And since I started doing it, I've had no problem with insects getting in. I just, for my cell cameras, I just make sure whenever I'm out putting out my like velvet cams, I just make sure to kind of go to those, make one pass through those in May and hit those all, and then they're good to go.
Right.
So we have 2 more questions, man. The marathon is almost over. We are on the home stretch here. Tristan Widrig, I think is his name. In his Instagram post, man, he's wearing a bow tie, I think. Man, he's fancy. Yeah, dude, fancy. I don't know what you're doing listening to this show, but look like you got better things to do than that. His first question: how far apart do you place your trail cameras from one another?
For me, it depends on the property and what the movement looks like. Mm-hmm. I mean, and obviously also the amount of resources you have. I mean, resources as in the number of cameras. And we have areas where, I mean, on that one specific deer I was hunting a couple of years ago, and mile long ridge, I think I had probably 8, 9, 10 cameras spread out through there. So that, they're on different levels, different topography features, different heights of the ridge and things. But, that's a tough thing to answer. It also depends on what your objective is on that camera strategy. Like if it's an inventory thing, you don't need a ton of cameras, especially if you're inventorying on community or primary scrapes. So if there's some type of habitat feature there that is a focal point, something like a water hole, food plot, primary food source, primary scrapes, community scrapes, you can get away with a smaller number of cameras. So I mean, it's all scenario based. Like I could give 10 different examples on 10 different properties that are 10 different answers.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said what's your objective of your camera strategy. Like what are you trying to accomplish? What I've always kind of said to people is that as a rule of thumb, I'd rather have one well-placed camera than 4 poorly placed cameras. That's for what I'm trying to accomplish. And for me, it's a lot of scrape stuff. So I'd rather have one camera on a really, really good scrape where I'm going to get inventory, and I'm going to have, be able to get some like inventory around not just bucks that are around, but also, dates that that area specifically turns on and stuff like that. Like, so to me, it's quality and not necessarily quantity. Quantity does help because it allows you to kind of, I think more so than anything for me, a quantity of cameras helps me eliminate spots more so than find them per se. It does help me find them, but it also helps me go like, hey, this is a bad spot here. I let a camera soak here for 6 months and saw diddly squat. I think we're good. Now you can also get bamboozled I had a spot like that this year. My camera was 50 yards out of the game. I moved it 50 yards and it is like a honey hole, and so there's a little bit of that too. I don't have like a strategy for how far apart I I place as many cameras as I feel is necessary in order to learn what it is I'm trying to learn about that spot. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's
Yeah.
one because I have it dialed and I'm like, I only need one. I'm good, And other times, there's an area that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras, and it's probably within like a stretch of maybe 500 yards because I'm
Right.
trying to figure out how a specific deer is using this particular kind of like elevation line and how he's moving in between these different features. And so I'm trying to get a bead on him. And so this year I ran a handful of cameras in that area because I was really just trying to figure one deer out, trying to figure out what he's doing, and I knew he was spending time there. So yeah, I don't think there's a stock answer. I think it's all based on what you want. But if you got them, if you got them, smoke them. Like
That's just it. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of my theory. This one also is from Tristan. So this is the last one. Ding, ding, ding. Going to ring the bell like I'm getting out of drug rehabilitation program with my 12-step program. 13th step is ringing the bell. He says, how far away do you hunt from the cameras that you sent? Do you hunt right over them, or are you hunting off of them?
I've done both.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to where you're running those cameras and what the objective of the camera is. If it's a general location to gather inventory where most of that movement is at night, if it's like on a less invasive location, something like an ag field, food source, inside corner, where there's not a ton of daylight activity, if they're not moving there in the day, I'm not hunting it. I mean, that's the general theme there. And then those more intrusive cameras, the one thing that I'd like to do, and I do often, I guess, is when you have historical information or of a known bedding area. So that like deer are bedding in this general area, to basically have a camera there and kind of plot or plan your access route to that general area where that camera is. And if the sign's saying, hey, like there's deer using this is one of the exit trails, there's rubs, there's scrapes, there's tracks, scat, whatever the sign is, go check that camera. If there's daylight activity there, then hunt it. If there's not daylight activity there, then you can make your way around that bedding area and go to another point. But I do think it is smart to have cameras in some of those more intrusive areas and not plan to check them unless you plan to hunt in that general area. And that kind of confirms, what you're seeing maybe on the way in with what the camera's seeing, and then that plays into your hunting strategy. So I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, and I agree. And I do both. It's like I'll hunt. I mean, I've literally hunted the same tree that the camera was in before. Because it was the tree I needed to be in. And then sometimes I don't hunt, near them. I'm using them just to kind of know that deer are kind of in the area. I will say for me, more often than not, I'm hunting more often than not close to the camera. And the reason for that is just because I am kind of prioritizing those kind of dates and spots as opposed to a specific deer. And I'm a working guy like everybody else is, limited time to kind of try to get out. And so when I strike, I have to be kind of very strategic, and it's like, it's go time now. I know that this spot is going to turn on. It doesn't do me any good to be 60 yards away from that spot when I know that spot right there for 3 days is going to be the spot to be in, because I've validated that over the course of 3 seasons of running trail cameras at that spot. That doesn't mean that sometimes I might not set off that. One thing that I've talked about, I forget who I was talking to about it. It's one way that I actually use Spartan Forge's kind of predictive like model of like, is it a transition area day? Is it a core area day? Is it a full range day in terms of like their predictive movement or whatever? And how I kind of use that is if I know that there's a deer in the area, like this year, that one big deer I was trying to kill, I had him on some primary scrapes. He disappeared. The wind wasn't right necessarily for me to hunt the spot that I knew that he was kind of in and around this particular primary scrape. But there was another area that I thought he might spend time in just based on how deer kind of travel through this area. And it was I think it was either a transition day or a full range day. And so what that said to me was like, well, the wind isn't right there. I can't hunt him there. But based on collared deer data in my area, with the weather conditions what they are today, deer are more likely to move a larger portion of their range today. So what I was able to do was actually set up in another area where the wind was actually good for me. Well, good for me in terms of like I can give the deer the wind, but not blow myself up.
Right.
And still have an opportunity to hunt that deer because he was more likely than any other day, or not any other day, but more likely that day to use more of his range than he was, other days. And so I was still in the game, didn't have to blow up the primary spot, but I was able to hunt using the sign, but hunt off the sign in a place that was more advantageous to me, knowing that he was more likely to be willing to get up out of his bed and move a further distance during daylight that day. And so that's when I'll start to hunt off sign and hunt further away from sign is scenarios like that. But it's one of those things I want to get better at because, you and I both know Nathan Killen and a lot of the guys who are just like straight killers. The more and more I talk to them, the more and more I realize they hunt off of sign a lot of the time. Even when it's super hot, they don't set up on it. They're set up 60 yards from it, 70 yards from it, whatever the case is. They're killing them coming to or from, not at the spot. So
right. Yeah, the only other thing I would say with the kind of the mass social acceptance of cell cameras and the market trend and everyone shifting towards cell cameras, it gives you the ability to run those things in more intrusive areas. And if you're getting daylight photos from a cell camera, like don't necessarily, like all the things we're talking about, like hunting off of sign, scouting your way in, don't overcomplicate it at the same point. So it's like it's a dichotomy, like it's give and take, and being able to assess the actual situation. Because if you have good access and you're getting daylight photos in that specific spot consistently, like don't overcomplicate things. If you can get in and get set up and you have clean wind, like where your setup is solid, like it's almost a no-brainer.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, that is it. That is the 2-hour marathon, brother. We are done. Congratulations. You win. You win nothing for that. Hey, man, I appreciate you coming on and doing this. Before I let you get going, let people know where they can find out more about you. Let them know where they can find out more about Exodus.
Yeah, ExodusOutdoorGear.com, across social, all things Exodus. You can find pretty much anything you want, trail camera info, all kinds of blogs, all kinds of content. Yeah, and if you want a trail camera, ExodusOutdoorGear.com is the place to get one.
Get it. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.